This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about civic travel, going somewhere with more than just you and your companions in mind, contributing to the communities you're visiting, whether that be volunteering your time or donating items in need. Our guest today can speak from personal experience. Jason Everett is a soldier in the Iowa National Guard and just returned from a civic travel trip to Cuba. He joins us today via Skype from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Jason, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Hi, Mark. Good to be with you.
So first of all, let's ask you the questions we ask all of our guests so they get a little bit of an insight into you. What has been your biggest discovery while traveling? I know you've traveled both for personal and with the Guard. What's your biggest discovery?
I think my biggest discovery, and really the thing that just keeps me going back for traveling, is just the connection that you find with people, even people that are so much different than you, who have different cultures, different religions, all these different things. You just learn a lot from people, and you find that even as different as we might be on the spectrum, there's a lot of similarities that we have. And so finding that connection with people in different places is really something that attracts me.
Absolutely. I totally agree. What's the favorite place that you've been to?
I think, the Middle East. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East. And so I've always been fascinated with Middle Eastern culture and history and some of the conflicts and just the political science relations, between countries there. So I would say Israel and the West Bank. Those are two of the places that I've spent the most time in. I've traveled back and forth quite a bit from there.
Fascinating. And listeners, we have a top travel tips in 2 minutes video and destination page for Israel at voyagereport.com. Just click on destinations. Jason, what's the next place that you're traveling to?
It's yet to be determined, but if I had to choose today, I would probably say India. It's just it's a big country, diverse peoples, and just beautiful landscapes. And I would love to buy or rent one of those old Enfield motorcycles and take one from one side of the country to the other.
Oh my goodness, that sounds like a great topic for a podcast, right, listeners? We'll have him back once he gets back from India. That's fantastic. So tell us, you went to Cuba in July. What did you do when you were there?
Well, initially when I was planning on going to Cuba, the idea of going to Cuba was just to get there before Cuba changed. I had a feeling that Cuba was going to change one way or the other, either economic and diplomatic relations were going to open more, since President Obama opened things, and Cuba was going to change because of prosperity, or that the window was going to close for independent travelers going there. And so initially I just wanted to get in the door and travel around and visit with people and just learn about Cuba. But interestingly, the trip turned into kind of a skateboard aid trip. I ended up bringing 21 skateboards to kids in Cuba.
And why did you decide to bring skateboards of all things?
Well, it was funny. It was I do what I did with Cuba, what I do with every trip. Before I go, I just gorge myself on travel videos and documentaries and things. And so I was watching some Vice documentaries and National Geographic on Cuba, and I kept seeing this theme of skateboarders in Cuba and kids who love skateboarding in Cuba. But I learned that they have no skateboard shops in Cuba, and the only skateboards that are getting into Cuba are ones that are being brought over and sometimes smuggled, into Cuba. And I thought that's such a cool idea. Maybe I'll just bring a few skateboards there, and maybe some of my friends and family have a few skateboards, and not a big deal. I just bring a few and give them to a few kids.
I love that. I mean, I've heard of people bringing food and medicine and teaching supplies, but skateboards is really interesting, especially for the connection that's possible there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really popular right now, among a group of youth, and they just love it. And the kids there are looking for ways to just like express themselves and to be creative. And I don't think there's a lot of ways to do that in Cuba. So the kids that are skateboarding, I mean, they just absolutely love it.
So, and I was surprised to learn, Jason, you don't even skateboard.
Yeah, I don't at all. And I actually was reminded that I don't skateboard. I'm not a good skateboarder. The day before, when I got on a skateboard after watching some trick videos, and I injured myself. So so yeah, I'm not a good skateboarder. It's probably not something I'm going to pick up, in the near future. But I did enjoy it while I was there, and it didn't matter that I didn't skateboard. It was I found it easy to connect with people who did.
Well, and that's the main goal here. And so, even though it wasn't perhaps your passion or it wasn't something that you had done for a long time, it was something that you thought would make a connection.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and it ended up being a great connection too.
So, how did this work? You landed and you had a big bag of skateboards, and what did you go from there?
Well, yeah, actually, I had 3 bags of skateboards, so I had about like 150 pounds of skateboards. So, yeah, I got there, got interrogated a little bit at the airport.
I bet.
Yeah, because I think the concern with the government there is that you're bringing things to like sell on the black market or something. Um, so after an interrogation, then I got into a taxi and made it to my casa particular, which is kind of like an Airbnb, and from there just try to come up with a plan of finding kids for these skateboards.
What was that plan?
Well, before I left, I got in touch with a guy named Rene Lacour, and he's the founder of Amigo Skate, which is an organization out of Florida that brings skateboards to Cuba like every year. So he gave me some names, plus I just jotted down names that I found in documentaries, and and so I just hoped when I got there that things would just fall into place, and it really did. I mean, there was just a lot of serendipity that took place when we got there because I found somebody for every board and really connected with some of the most important people kind of in the skateboard culture in Cuba.
Well, now you didn't take the easy way out here. I mean, it's easy to sort of stand on a street corner where there's a lot of kids and just sort of hand out skateboards, but you didn't do that. You almost you were looking for some kind of connection. You didn't just stand there and hand them out.
Yeah, and that was really important for me for a number of reasons. One, so many people partnered with me for this mission. A lot of friends, family. I mean, I had friends from DC to Portland to China who sent me money to buy boards.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, and so I just felt like a great. I made a commitment. I made a promise that like if you support this mission of me getting skateboards and delivering them to kids, like I'm going to provide you pictures, a written story, a video, and so it was really important to me that I found the right kids, like kids that not just a kid who was going to like the skateboard for a few days and then put it in the corner of the room to collect dust, like kids that loved these boards. And so I waited patiently, and my friend who was with me as well just waited patiently for the right connection with the right kids.
You describe some of these connections on your Facebook page, and I want to read one of them with a little girl you called A. Let me read a little bit, and then you can tell us why she met your criteria for getting a skateboard. Jason writes, quote, "After feeling it out a few times, A put one glittering sneaker on the center of the board and the other on the ground. She then kicked, she pushed, and pulling her foot up on the board to the other, she coasted, with one hand shouting out to point at his daughter and the other waving frantically to get his wife's attention. The father laughed excitedly and said, 'It's her first time on a skateboard.' He proudly attributed her instinctive skate mastery to footwork skills honed while playing football." So that's a wonderful description of the excitement of this family. Why did you give her a skateboard?
She was just there were probably 3 or 4 other kids that day that even rode on that skateboard. But when she stepped on it, I mean, she rode that skateboard for like 40 minutes, and she was just graceful with it and very confident, and you could just tell that she loved it. And we just wanted to find, we wanted to make sure that we found some girls to give skateboards to, because I think a lot of skateboards, come into, Cuba and Havana and stuff like that, and maybe a lot of the boys get to the front of the line. The boards trickle down to them. So we wanted to find some girls to give them to as well. And she was just a natural. I mean, I think she was in gymnastics as well, which is why she had like such great balance on the board. But yeah, it was hers. It was obvious.
Well, that's right. Civic travel isn't for boys. It isn't for girls. It's for everybody. So you have to be diverse, obviously, when you do it. Another story I loved is this one boy. I think you were in this town and you hadn't found anyone to give a skateboard to. I mean, obviously, a lot of kids wanted them, but you hadn't really had that connection. And you talk about a 9-year-old boy who absolutely blew you away. I think he was from Havana, but he was visiting his family in this smaller town. Tell us about that.
That was a really cool story because, we were a little discouraged in that town. It was a smaller town. It was one of these towns like on the way to like some islands and beaches. So it was kind of like a tourist transient town. And we didn't find anybody skateboarding in this town. And I thought we were going to leave without giving somebody a skateboard, which meant that we were going to have more skateboards to carry on to the next town. And so it was like the last night that we were there, and we just finished talking about like disappointment of not finding somebody. And we're just going down this dark back street to our Casa Particular, and this little kid just called out, from a cluster of silhouettes, and I could barely see him, but he asked to see my skateboard, and I looked at my friend with like hope, like maybe this is the kid, and he got on the skateboard, and he was incredible with it. Like, I mean, he was just doing tricks that I hadn't seen many kids in all of Cuba do. I mean, this kid was definitely dedicated to skateboarding. And before we give a skateboard to any kid, like we wanted to, or any young person, we wanted to like meet the parents first to make sure like it was okay. We didn't just want to go like giving gifts, without getting permission. So this kid took us on an adventure to like the other side of town, and we had no idea where he was taking us. But he took us to his house, and like the whole neighborhood gathered around to watch this kid do tricks on this board. And it was while watching that we knew that this is the kid we were looking for who's going to get this board.
Listeners, we're going to ask Jason a little bit later for his tips for travelers, both frequent and infrequent. Since he's traveled so much, I'm sure he has a lot of tips that he can share. So in reality, Jason, it sounds like you sort of let fate have a little bit of a helping hand here. You talk about how you came in contact with not just these children, but also people along the way. You alluded to earlier that you had made some contacts there in the skateboarding world, and you also had fate help you reach out and meet a special taxi driver.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I met a few special taxi drivers, but I think the one that we're referring to is, and this was one of those like serendipitous moments where there's a guy named Che Pando, who's kind of like a pioneer of skateboarding in Cuba and in Havana. Like everybody knows about this guy, and I was really hoping that maybe I'd run into him or something, but it just wasn't likely. And our very first taxi driver, we were driving to our first Casa Particular, which is like Airbnb. And when he put the bags in the car, he's like, "Whoa, what's in these bags? These bags are so heavy." And I'm like, "Oh, they're skateboards." And he's like, "Wow, skateboards." He's like, "My neighbor is big into skateboards, and he's a tattoo artist too." And this guy Che Pando that I read about and saw these documentaries on, he was a tattoo artist. And so I was like, "Oh, is his name Che?" And he's like, "No way, that is his name."
Oh my goodness.
And the place that he was taking us to stay was on the same street as Che's mom. So Che's
Wow.
mom, we went out looking for Che's mom and like couldn't find her, and we're saying, "Hey, do you know Che's madre? Do you know Che's madre?" And then this elderly woman was like across the street, like waving at us, and we went over, and she's like, "I'm Che's madre." And so it was just incredible, and that's how we met Che, and that's how we ended up really meeting a lot of other people, kind of in the skateboard community there.
I love that story, and I love the fact that it was just sort of meant to be.
Yeah.
You mentioned the reception of the kids. Obviously, they're happy to get anything free. But what was the reception of the adults? Probably most Americans don't come bearing skateboards, and I wonder what their reaction to you was, what their reception was.
It was I think that was one of the really special parts too, like there's a couple stories there where I really highlight the reaction of the parents, because these are Cuban parents. They are like hustling to survive, in Cuba. I mean, you can read that like the average monthly wage is like, $25 to $50 a month. And so to get a skateboard, these skateboards are like 2 months of wages for some families. Just a really big deal. Like, there's no way that these kids are gonna get a skateboard, from their parents. So the reaction from some of these parents were just really just warm and heartfelt and humble, and just deeply appreciative. And I think that was just one of the big rewards of giving away these skateboards, was not just giving these kids a gift, but also just kind of rewarding these parents, for just, working hard and taking care of the family.
Absolutely. Now, perhaps not in Cuba, because there are rules about travel to Cuba, and those just got tighter on September 1st, and we have more information about that at voyagereport.com under our Cuba page. But certainly you could go to destinations, Jason, and simply lie out on the beach and get a nice tan and drink some wonderful drinks. But this took a lot of effort, and it's not easy. Why not just go and relax on vacation?
I'm not like totally opposed to that, but in all the trips that I've been to, like, the value and the treasure has been deep connections with people in a country. So I just try to travel in a way that puts me in a position where I have a better chance of making that connection with people. And I think the way to do that is really to get away from kind of like the touristy areas, and get away from the expensive hotels, and just find ways to just kind of just get closer to the people. So that's kind of why I choose to do it that way. And a lot of countries I've traveled to, I've met people that we've stayed in contact, and we've stayed friends, and so I've really been just rewarded by traveling that way.
You're not just looking for an Instagram photo, you're really looking for a connection for life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I learned so much. I mean, I've learned so much on these trips, and it's why it's like every year I want to go somewhere, because it's just I've learned so much about different cultures and people, and the differences between people, and I think it's just made me a more tolerant, accepting, and appreciative person.
Is there a place that you'd love to go to continue your civic travel journeys?
There's I don't know, there's nowhere in particular. I just would love to go everywhere, and there's so much need everywhere, but then there's just so much treasure to be found, and so much adventure to be found, even with serving in a civic duty capacity. So I'd love to go to South Africa. I'd love to go to India. Yeah, there's just a lot of places I'd like to go, but I would say South Africa and traveling around India are two places I've kind of pinpointed as future destinations.
Well, clearly your civic travels have had an impact on others, not just on the children and the adults in Cuba that you met, but also those keeping track of your journeys on your Facebook page. You had a lot of comments. One poster wrote, "Thank you for taking this on and being a true ambassador for peace." Wow, that's heavy. Another wrote, "My heart is full. When you read those comments, Jason, what do you think?
It just, it makes these trips worthwhile uh, to be able to bring people along. And that's one of the reasons why I love traveling too. It's not just for myself. I get to take my family with me. I get to take my friends, people who I don't know, people who may never get to Cuba, may never know a Cuban. And from my experience there or other places I've been to, Iraq, Afghanistan, um, Turkey, like all these different places, some of these people will never get to go there, but maybe from my trip there, they'll look at, people from this country and realize like, wow, they're just like us.
I think that's one of the lessons that anybody who's traveled a lot comes away with, that no matter where you are, there are the same struggles and the same hopes and the same dreams and the same fears, no matter what language you speak or what continent you're on. And I think that's a universal truth that you can only really fully appreciate once you've traveled and tried to communicate with somebody who doesn't speak your language, or eaten an interesting food in another place. And it's one of the joys of travel. It's that revelation that you get not only about the world and other cultures, but also about yourself.
Absolutely.
So where else have you been in the world, and what have you done? I know that you were talking about a trip to Israel and obviously your service in the Guard. You really have this affinity for trying to help others while abroad.
Yeah, well, I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, obviously, with the military, and with the military, like those trips, those are like really what opened my eyes and kind of changed my life, because I was there on a mission, I was doing a job, but I really connected with a lot of people, while I was wearing the uniform, and that's where I kind of developed like an interest and a care for other people. And so in Afghanistan, I was a medic. In Iraq, I was an infantry soldier. But I've traveled to Southeast Asia a couple of years ago, and I was there for about a month and a half. Rented motorbikes and just traveled around the country, and traveled around all the different countries. Was in Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and the focus of that trip was actually Myanmar, because it had just kind of opened up for international tourist travel. But yeah, and I've traveled to Israel and the West Bank, quite a bit, and really those trips, I've been there about 6 times. And those trips were more just my interest in kind of understanding that conflict and the people on both sides, trying to understand it from both people's perspective, but then also, going there as somebody, an international traveler, and trying to find ways to, just trying to find some work to do that can assist in the finding solutions, to the problems there, or at the very least, becoming friends with people on both sides to try to help move the peace process.
I feel like I'm speaking to the future Secretary of State or something, a diplomat here that can help bring people together. Now, Jason, what our listeners are hearing you talk about this, and they're thinking, well, I wouldn't know the first thing about how to begin with civic travel, whether it be skateboards or medical supplies or teaching supplies or whatnot. Perhaps they don't even know where to begin. They don't have the initiative, perhaps, to know how to pull something like this together, and they're too intimidated to try. What would your message to them be?
I think you can always find something to do. My advice would probably be, just go online and do some research. Find out what are the needs, in that country, and what kind of organizations are meeting those needs. And like before Cuba, I had a bunch of ideas, and I was shooting out emails to all kinds of different people. I mean, to writers, photographers, to journalists, many skateboarders, all kinds of people, academics. Even I think some orphanages. I did some research on orphanages, and a lot of things didn't pan out. So I would just recommend just reaching out and trying to connect with people. There's usually you can find some kind of video on YouTube or something on Facebook where there's somebody who's doing a unique work or unique service in a country, and then just contact them. I mean, there's plenty of people out there who are more than happy to partner with somebody who's coming. So if you're American and you're going to travel to some country, it's a big deal to them that maybe somebody can bring a bag of supplies that they can't get there. So don't sell yourself short. Know that there's a lot of people out there who would love to have a temporary partner who's coming to visit, bring things or serve in some capacity.
It sounds like your message is don't be intimidated. Take the first step.
Absolutely. And that's really how some of the most incredible travel adventures take place. You really just got to, just throw the line out there and just see what you catch. But there's just adventures to be had everywhere. And the adventures that you find where you're able to meet some kind of need or serve people, those are the ones that really yield a lot of treasure, and mostly in relationships.
You mentioned about bringing things from home to give away, and I am struck in my travels, whether it be going to Kenya or Pakistan or Vietnam, when you bring things, just little trinkets or bags of American rice from the Midwest or whatever it happens to be, it really goes a long way to opening up some goodwill. It's a great conversation starter, and they really do treasure that. It's amazing when you think about it. I remember I went to Pakistan to teach journalism for 2 weeks, and I brought these little packets of rice. I think I got them at a store in Minneapolis, locally grown. And my goodness, I mean, you would have thought that I brought gold bars from Fort Knox. I mean, they just absolutely loved not just the gift, but the gesture.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it could be something as simple as an origami creation, like getting a stack of learning one or two like origami creations, and there you are on a bus and you make a flapping bird and you give it to a young child. Like there's just so many like little simple things that you can do that are little gestures but are a big deal to people.
Well, and of course I have a horrible sweet tooth, so little chocolates never hurt either, I'm sure. So why don't we get your travel tips, both for those who travel frequently and those who may only go once a year, once every other year, or whatnot. What are your top travel tips that you've learned and honed over your years of traveling the globe?
I just say do a lot of research, before you go. Watch a lot of YouTube videos. There's a lot of people doing independent, travel videos, so you can get an idea of what an adventure could look like or be like, and you can find some of the pitfalls and learn a lot of good logistical information. But I would also say, from my experience, the best way to travel is to get away from the touristy areas and the hotels, and now you have Airbnbs and go eat what the locals are eating, and then of course finding a way to connect with locals before you go, whether it's through like couch surfing or there's so many mediums that we can use to connect with other people. Just something that there's something that you're interested in, if you're a writer, if you're a photographer, if you're a skateboarder, like connect with somebody there that has the same passion as you. Like people love to host people from other countries. So that would probably be my biggest tip is connect, find a way to connect with locals.
I was in Morocco, Casablanca, and I'm not really a big cook. I mean, I love food, but I can't really cook anything well. I open up the jar, I plop it in the pan, and that's it. But I took a cooking class in Casablanca, Morocco. There's actually a video of it at voyagereport.com. And it was just me and this family in Casablanca. And we went to the market to find the food. And she selected the live chicken that we were going to have that night and all the vegetables. And then they invited me into their home. And it was 3 generations of this family. And me, who doesn't know anything about cooking, with my hands,
Yeah.
there in the sauces and the chicken and, getting it all ready. It was such an amazing experience, and they were so gracious. We had
Yeah.
wonderful things to talk about, and it really never would have dawned on me years ago to do something like that, but I just love the experience.
Yeah, you have to experience hospitality from some of these other cultures and countries, like really just unparalleled. And I think that's been the most humbling thing is in all the places I've traveled. I've traveled to places that we would consider like, an undeveloped, country or developing country, or it's a poor country. But I've been in people's houses for like Ramadan or other celebrations, for Passover. And, in some of these houses, like they don't have much, but they're so excited to give you what they have. And I think that's always been humbling. It's really taught me so much. So, yeah, you definitely have to experience the hospitality of these people in other countries.
So how are you going to top skateboards in Cuba?
I don't know. I just have no idea, Mark.
You're going to have to take suggestions. Listeners, you can send him your suggestions, and maybe that'll be your next adventure.
Yeah.
What did your parents say? What did your family say when you told them what you were going to do, and then when they saw what happened?
They're used to it now.
Oh.
They're used to me just traveling to all kinds of crazy places and with crazy ideas, and they loved it. Like my parents are great. They supported it. They bought a skateboard. They shared my Facebook messages, and so they were totally on board.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly wish you all the best on your next Civic travel. I hope that this podcast and your story has inspired some of our listeners. Again, just to sort of reiterate, you're not part of a huge nonprofit. You don't have an army of people working for you. You just decided that you wanted to make this a priority, and you started making calls.
Yeah, that's right. Anybody can do it. Anybody can do it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Jason Everett is a soldier in the Iowa National Guard. He just returned from a Civic travel trip to Cuba, and we're so glad that you went. Thank you very much, Jason, for joining us and sharing your story.
Hey, thank you, Mark. It was good talking with you.
Listeners, are you ready to go on a Civic travel adventure? Have you already been on one? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.